Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And we are answering probably the most important 24 hours since the beginning of the special military operation, because for example today the leaders of France, Germany, United Kingdom and Poland arrived in Kiev. Macron, Merz, Summer and Tusk plan to discuss the possibility of a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. This is a very important piece of news. There is a high probability that the ceasefire in Ukraine will be extended to 30 days. That was stated by the German Chancellor. I very much hope that an agreement on a ceasefire in Ukraine will be reached this weekend, Merz said. He added that given the 3-day ceasefire declared by Russia, there is a high probability that it will be extended to 30 days and then negotiations on peace agreement can begin. However, the publication emphasized that Ukraine did not agree to the 3-day ceasefire proposed by Russia. So another important article we got about the United States of America regarding this issue. The US and Europe are finalizing a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. This proposal could be made in the coming days or even hours, the diplomats said, so most likely this weekend. If Moscow rejects the initiative, new sanctions could be imposed against it. So this is the most important, and most likely the United States of America is going to be the main striker, the main attack force from the Western countries. They will probably impose the biggest sanctions ever on Russian economy. So now let's discuss everything in chronology. So today Europeans came to Kiev, and they most likely were going or have already provided Zelensky a 30-day ceasefire plan. Most likely these leaders and Zelensky will propose this 30-day ceasefire to the Russian Federation, to Putin. But the thing is that according to information we have, Putin is doing everything possible to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, but Kiev is trying to avoid negotiations. Pakov said, this is the press secretary of Putin, in an interview with American television channel ABC, and he added the most important, demand from the Russian side is that he stressed that in order to ceasefire, the West must stop supplying weapons to Kiev. We understand and we believe that the Western countries are not going to stop this situation, are not going to stop supplying Kiev with weapons, which means that most likely after European leaders will announce and propose the 30-day ceasefire, most likely this ceasefire would be rejected by Russia because the Western countries are not going to stop supplying Kiev with weapons. And for this situation, the United States of America most likely will impose additional package of sanctions, very huge sanctions against Russia. And most likely this can lead to another very interesting situation. Embassy in Kiev reports high possibility of significant air attack on Ukraine in the next few days. So this is very important. And what kind of attack the Western countries are talking about? They are talking about possible use of Oreshnik missile. Russia to close skies over Kapustin Yar test site where Oreshnik is launched. So all these things, all these small pieces is pieces of a very big puzzle. Once again, if Russia rejects, United States of America will impose sanctions, and most likely Russia will be forced to use Oreshnik against Ukraine and probably against some military objects or even against Zelensky himself, with the purpose to remove the root causes the conflict. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, because during this ceasefire we got lots of important updates and details. And first let's talk about the northern part of Ukraine, about the Chernigov and the Sumy regions. When talking about this area, we don't have any changes on the ground. We just have another video how the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine along the entire border between Russia and Ukraine in the northern part of Ukraine. So just a regular video, you can say, but if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of May, we're not going to move even further in April, just May, we're gonna see lots of geolocated icons exactly in this area. We are talking about this part of Ukraine. As you can see, and all these strikes, all these artillery strikes means just one thing, that there are concentrations of Ukrainian forces in every single concentration of these icons. Most likely huge army of the Ukrainians is located in this part. Very huge army of Ukrainians is located in this part of Ukraine and so on. So the Russians are bombing this territory either to prevent Ukrainians from attacking and moving deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, or maybe after Oreshnik, the Oreshnik strike, the Russians are planning to begin another offensive operation with the purpose to force Zelensky and to force Kiev to accept Russian proposal of the peace settlement of Ukraine. Now let's talk about the settlement of Teotkina. There are very heavy clashes in this area, but we see that despite the fact that Ukrainians are sending one wave after another with the purpose to seize and to take under control this settlement, we see that the Russians, as for the beginning of 10th of May of 2025, have repelled every single attack launched by the Ukrainians. The Russians are bombing Ukrainian positions along the border. Several days ago, we got several geolocations that Ukrainians the city itself, but as for now we don't have anything that can confirm whether the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and to dig in deeper. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Belgorod direction. Today we got very interesting information. More precisely, we got these updates yesterday. According to several pro-Russian resources, very reliable pro-Russian resources, yesterday the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to answer the settlement of Marina. And today, by the morning of the 10th of May of 2025, this information was confirmed by several neutral mappers. So as you can see, this is the first village on the Belgorod direction that was taken by the Russians on the territory of Ukraine. This is another village which most likely will be a part of secure zone that the Russians are trying to create right now. Now let's move and let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction, or about the Liman direction. As you can see, we have a lot of icons, and we have a lot of icons with flags, which means that we have a lot of changes on the ground. So let's just discuss in details, and first let's compare this map between the dates. So this is the situation that you can see in front of your screen, is the situation by the beginning of the 10th of May, and this is the situation by the end of the 9th of May. As you can see, the map was adjusted significantly. Now let's discuss everything in details, and first let's talk about the area between Makeyevka and Novodiana. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in this area by taking under control several tree lines between the settlements, and the Russians continue advancing further. When talking about this part, we see that there is a huge dynamic. Almost every single day we are adjusting the map in the Russian favor. So this is the situation by the end of the 6th of May of 2025, and this is the moment when approximately everything started in this area. And starting from the 6th of May of 2025, we've been adjusting the map almost every single day, and we see that the Russians are trying to get as close as possible and to encircle the settlement of Grevkovka from the east and the northeast, and of course from the south, because this is another area where we can see huge changes. This is the situation by the end of the 9th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of 10th of May. As you can see, the Russians took under control another company stronghold on the way to the settlement of Novomir, and the Russians improved their positions in fields, trying to get as close as possible to the settlement of Grekovka from the southwest. Important, very important progress on the ground. The Russians continue creation of the buffer zone before Ukrainian positions in the Borova direction and Russian positions on the Liman direction. They need this buffer zone to begin offensive in the south. Now let's talk about the settlement of Nova. Here we can see another area where we got some changes. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the northeastern part of Ritkadup, and in the southeastern part. We see that the Russians are trying to answer the village of Ritkadup, at least from two directions, and most likely this is going to happen in the very near future. Furthermore, the Russians, according to information we have, began advancing in the southern direction, trying to outflank the settlement of Kolodisi. So as you can see, according to geolocations, according to different mappers, the Russians answered the eastern part of Kolodisi and managed to improve their positions there. And now we see that the Russians are trying to outflank the settlement of Kolodisi from the north and to attack this village from behind, from the northwest. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So as you can see, the flower of Liman is blooming, continue blooming, and we see that the Russians are most likely tomorrow will increase their pressure with the purpose to finalize the battle, answer the river of Nitrius, and then the Russians will turn in the southern direction and will continue offensive to the city of Liman. Now let's talk about the Sivas direction. These days, almost every single day we got updates about the changes on the ground. For example, today, according to several mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly to the south of the settlement, and basically the Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of farms that are located in the central part of the settlement were cut from supply and support. This is very important stronghold that the Russians are trying to take under control. So we have changes almost every single day. So let's take a look how the map has been changed since the 6th of May of 2025. This is approximately the situation on the ground, and during the previous 4 days the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly. Now Ukrainians lost control over the main supply lines, and most likely if the situation continue developing the same way, most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back in the western direction towards the village of Novoselka. If Ukrainians lose Verkhnekamensk, this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense of the city of Siversk from the southeast, and from the east the Russians will be able to maintain the lines, and the Russians will be able to begin offensive operation or continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Serebryanka from the southeast and from the east. This will allow the Russians to semi-encircle the settlement of Siversk from the northeastern, eastern, southeastern and the southern directions. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kibban BSK direction. During the previous 24 hours we got significant number of updates exactly from this area. As you can see, another day with a lots of flags on the ground, a lots of changes as you can see. First let's compare the map. This is the situation by the end of the 9th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 10th of May of 2025. First let's talk about the southeastern flank. The Russians managed to improve their positions in this area significantly. First of all, this is once again the situation by the end of yesterday, and this is the situation by the morning of the 10th of May. The Russians, as you can see, managed to establish complete control over the road N20 from the settlement of Alexandropol in the northern direction to almost the settlement of Romanovka. Several company strongholds, trenches and fortifications were taken by the Russians. Now the Russians, according to this configuration of map, have a very powerful and very strong base, and now they can continue offensive operation further, and the most important, now the Russians can accumulate and concentrate a critical mass before further offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Romanovka. Currently, this village is the primary target for the Russians on this flank, because if the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the northern direction, then the Russians will be able to continue their offensive from the settlement of Romanovka in the northeastern direction with the purpose to attack the village of Katerinovka from the southwest. This can lead to complete collapse not just of the Kibban BSK water reserve defense line, but also of complete collapse of the southern Konstantinovka defense line. So the situation here is very difficult for the Ukrainians, and as for now they still haven't managed to stabilize the situation despite the ceasefire period of time that Ukrainians had for this and still have for these purposes. When talking about the southwestern flank, we can see the same picture in this direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians took under control several dense network of fortifications in the southwest of Zarya. The Russians improved their positions in the vicinity of Alexandropol, and the Russians continue offensive operation along reserves and rivers in the northeastern direction with the purpose to get as close as possible to the settlement of Yablunovka and to the village of of Alexandra Kalinova. So the situation for Ukrainians in this area is critical. Basically, the Ukrainians are in desperate in this pocket, and most likely this is just a matter of time when the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back completely from this area, and when Ukrainians lose control over this territory. It's just a matter probably of 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks, but obviously during the June of 2025, the Russians most likely would be already somewhere in the vicinity of the settlements Kibban BSK, Katerinovka, Alexandra Kalinova, and Yablunovka. Now let's talk about the Pakov's direction. We have lots of changes, mainly in the Novopavlovka area. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly. First of all, the Russians took under control several trenches and strongholds on the way towards the villages of Novonikolaevka and Muravka. I'll remind you that during the previous days, the Russians were attacking Novosergeyevka. Most likely those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation, so that is why the Russians decided to attack from the south with the purpose to take these two villages. The thing is that there is a river of Salona, and both settlements of Muravka and Novonikolaevka are located on the Russian side, which means that basically the Russians have no problems of continuing offensive in this area. Furthermore, we got a video from the settlement of Kotlarovka. This video and this settlement, according to different sources, was taken by the Russians a long time ago, probably 2 or 3 or 4 days ago. But we still haven't adjusted the map because we believe that there are still very heavy clashes. And this is one of the episodes of very heavy clashes on the territory of the village. In this episode, we can see one building that was under Russian control, and we can see several buildings around Russian positions that were under complete control of the armored force of Ukraine. And the Ukrainians were attacking this small construction with the purpose to force a Russian soldier to fall back. So we see that according to this video, the Ukrainians controlled this part of the settlement probably by the morning of the 10th of May of 2025. So that is why we are not adjusting the map, because we believe that there are still very heavy clashes and that there are both the Russian and the Ukrainian soldiers on the territory of the settlement. Furthermore, according to different sources, the Russians continue maintaining their lines along the border with the Dnipro region. As for now, the Russians are not making any attempts to move further in the western direction with the purpose to cross the border itself, but as for now, we see that the Russians are consolidating themselves and concentrating themselves along the border in several kilometers, which allows them in the future, with just one offensive operation, to break this border, to break the border between the regions in the multiple areas. Anyway, according to information we have, the Russians currently have things to do. There are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Gorihova, which is located probably to the southwest of the settlement of Troitska. Now let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction. As we discussed, the turning point for the Battle of Bogatyr has already passed. The Russians managed to breach the lines of Ukrainian forces in this area in several places, and according to information we have, the Russians continue expanding their positions in the southeastern part. This information was confirmed both by neutral mappers and by several geolocations that were published by the Ukrainian forces. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians that were moving in the settlement already. So from this perspective, we see that the Russians currently control around 20-25% of the settlement, and we see that the Russians continue advancing. Now we understand that it's just a matter of time when the Russians will secure this territory completely. At the same time, the Russians continue advancing in the direction of the settlement of Alexeyevka from the northeast. So we expect that the Russians are trying to begin offensive and to begin clashes for both villages almost at the same time. So we are at a very interesting moments of the special military operation. Today a lot of things will be resolved, and most likely today the United States of America, or these days, will officially take Ukrainian position in this conflict. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.